Thank you very much, Heather. For those of you joining us, we have today for our fireside chat Heather Henyon, who's the founding partner of Mindshift Capital, a global venture fund based in Dubai, which exclusively invests in early stage women led technology companies. She's also the founder of the Women's Angel Network, investment network, WAIN, which is the first and largest women's angel group in the Middle East. So she's originally from the US. In fact, she's in the US right now, but she has lived in the Middle East for 15 years and is here today to tell us about the journey that led her here and women. So thank you again, Heather, for joining us today. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say this has been very anticipated, for me at least, and I'm sure everyone else. And I'd like to hear about your journey. So let's start at the beginning. How did you go from an analyst on Wall Street to establishing a VC fund?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Sarah, and thanks for having me here today. It's great to be here and great to speak to Startup Grind Muscat. I know you guys are in kind of the early stages, so just it's great to be part of it. And mabruk to everyone for building the ecosystem. I know it's not easy as someone who's been doing it for the last 10 years. Sorry, Sarah, is the connection okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
can hear you
Okay, just
great.
want to make sure. Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, I probably didn't take the traditional path, if there is one, to VC. So my background is financial services. I worked on Wall Street doing bond ratings. My MBA was actually in finance and entrepreneurship at Cornell University. So that was before going to Wall Street. But I guess, my history is more kind of in the quantitative world. So you do need those skills to be in venture. I think you need both sets of skills. You need the qualitative and the quantitative. So my family's a big kind of math and engineering family. So I worked with Vint Cerf, who's one of the founders of the internet. So kind of have that tech background as well. I also was a wireless analyst. I worked in 3G, 20 years ago, a while ago. Um, but yeah, so now, I think really I got involved in venture as an angel investor. So I was I guess, I've become a serial business angel investor. I worked at microfinance for 10 years before getting involved in angel investing. I started a mobile money company. So I also have been on the operator kind of entrepreneur side of the table as well. And that kind of got me, interested and excited about getting into angel investing. So I got involved in angel investing. Probably really 2013 is when I did it more seriously. I, made a couple small investments before that, but about 7, 8 years ago now. And just loved working with entrepreneurs. Liked, being able to relate to them on lots of different levels, and especially early stage investors. We are entrepreneurs because we're side by side with the entrepreneur helping to build the value of the business collectively. So we take minority stakes in the companies, which I think is an important differentiator, because people often ask me, including investors we talk to for Mindshift, how do we exert control or influence over the businesses that we're investing in, over the startups? And it's actually very relationship driven. So we don't have legal rights. I mean, we of course, make sure we get the legal rights we need to be able to perform our role successfully, and to kind of play out our fiscal requirements. But I mean, a lot of it is really just working with the entrepreneur, understanding them, helping them to build the value of the business. And so I guess, I won't go into all the details, but I got involved in angel investing, started Women's Angel Investor Network, which I'll talk more about a little bit later, I think, and just saw the opportunity, and then got involved with Dubai Angel Investors, where I was on the board and on the investment committee for a few years. Invested in another fund in Europe called Rising Tide Europe, which it's all women investors. We invest in tech companies in Europe. I became the advisor to another fund out of the Netherlands as well, focused on fintech and financial inclusion. And then also in the US, became involved with Next Wave Impact, which is an impact fund that's early stage, and I sit on the investment committee. So through all of those different funds, I learned a lot. I invested in over 100 early stage tech companies between the US, Middle East, and Europe. And I think a lot of it is very experiential to get into VC and to have your own fund. You really do need to have some experience doing this, because sometimes the only way you learn is the hard way. So you make mistakes and you figure out what to not to do next time. And when something else comes along that reminds you of that bad experience, you kind of raise the red flag around that. So I'll stop there, and then I'm sure that more of that will come up. Sorry, you're on mute.
How did you end up in the Middle East, and were your first investments here, or start further afield and then focus more on the region?
Yeah, so my path to the Middle East also is a little bit atypical. So my best friend growing up in the US in New Jersey was Syrian Lebanese, and I loved her family. I loved the food. I loved the culture, the hospitality. I was always very involved in, international politics, with Model United Nations and lots of different groups when I was a kid. I learned Russian, I learned French. I lived in France when I was a high school student on a bull farm of all places. And and I always had this kind of wanderlust. So for me, the Middle East was attractive because in the US, it often gets misrepresented in the media and in the kind of, I guess, mainstream culture. And I just wanted to go and see it with my own eyes. So I actually studied in Egypt when I was in university. I went to AUC, and then from there I just traveled. I went back to work there right when I finished college. And and then I also moved to Lebanon in 2005. So I lived in Egypt for 2 years, Lebanon for a couple of years, including during the war with Israel, which was, a totally different experience. And then you moved from Lebanon, from Beirut to Dubai in 2007. So so I think, I've had a long relationship with the region. I speak Arabic as well. And and lots of different dialects. People always try to figure out where I'm from, and kind of place me. But yeah, and I spent a lot of time, especially when I was working with Grameen Jameel, the microfinance company for the region. I spent a lot of time in Yemen and Syria, the border in Ujda in Morocco, on the border between Morocco and Algeria. So lots of places that I think most Arabs actually haven't been in the region. And I've had the privilege of seeing those places firsthand and the culture firsthand. And I think, the value that I bring often is that when I'm in the US, I can speak about my experiences. I also spent a lot of time in Palestine, and that's, quite a political issue in the US. So my perspective is different because I'm not Muslim, I'm not Jewish, I'm, basically sectarian. And I think the perspective I bring can help with just building bridges and connections and hopefully understanding of the West, towards the region.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm born and bred in the region, and I've definitely not been to a lot of those places that you've just mentioned. That's pretty cool. So how did you
And sorry,
start
you asked about the investment. So
investment?
it's sort of interesting. So, and I think actually this has been really pivotal with Mindshift as well. So with Grameen Jameel, the microfinance. So we were basically working with all these microfinance institutions that are in the region and supporting them. And then they were the ones providing loans to the poor Arab women. So we weren't the direct, lender to the individuals. We were providing funding or technical assistance to the actual MFIs, the banks. And one of the things I saw, because again of my background in financial services and project finance, was there was massive foreign exchange risk that a lot of these microfinance institutions were basically absorbing on their own. So because they were all taking funding from the Europeans and the Americans in hard currency, in dollars. And especially in a market like Egypt, it wasn't pegged, right? So we saw, firsthand in countries like Lebanon, what that means often, right? So, or in Turkey with the collapse of the lira. So I think one of the big issues, that we tried to address was creating a $50 million loan guarantee fund that we then used to leverage local currency financing to the MFIs, so that they were actually taking loans in, Egyptian pounds and Moroccan dirham, so whatever the local currency was, which really was good, especially in Egypt, where there was massive devaluation, a few years ago. So a lot of those banks would have gone belly up if they had been taking the funding directly in dollars or hard currency. So that was just a crazy initiative, because there were all kinds of kind of negotiations with all these local banks. We would do these road shows, and all the cross-border financing, I think I learned about from doing that, became really valuable with Mindshift, because it gave me a sense of understanding just, how do these different institutions work. And when you're building out a portfolio, especially, you have to be very careful around how you put it all together and how you build it. And you do have to think about things that in emerging markets that are different than, let's say, a US market. So legal structures, if you've got onshore political risk in a country where you have zero rights as a foreign investor, how do you mitigate that, or how do you manage that? And these are things, if I was just in the US and investing through a Delaware fund into the same market, same currency, same government systems, it's a non-issue. But a lot of people don't understand that about emerging markets. And so I think that big background and experience really positioned me well to set up something like Mindshift, where we're investing globally. We're not just investing in the region. So we've got, for example, an investment in Singapore. Would we invest in India? I worry about that because of the currency risk. I saw firsthand with Grameen Jamil how hard it was to just get US dollars out of the country. So it's not just about putting money in, it's getting money out also. And some of these political systems are very fragile. So and also, because we're long-term investors, we're not in it for 1-2 years, we're in it for kind of, I'd say realistically, 5 to 7 years. And our fund is 10 years, in terms of the fund life. We've got to be ready to deal with different, politicians or governments or things that change, as we know, on a pretty frequent basis in emerging markets.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and definitely some interesting points, because not people don't think about that, because often the funds are very focused on their, and what you're doing is much more broad. So it's definitely something that not everyone thinks about. And how did you move from the microfinancing to then angel investment? I guess that was the next step.
Yeah, well, so one of the things, even as a child, I was very entrepreneurial. I used to I don't know, it's maybe culturally harder for people to understand, but I was part of the Girl Scouts, and we used to sell cookies, to make money for the Girl Scouts. So I also would make these pot holders, so it's like weaving this thing. So one day, I was probably I might have been 9 or 10 years old or something. I went around and sold all those pot holders to neighbors the same way I'd sold the cookies. And this was the unethical part, where my mom became kind of a key part of my learning history. So I told the neighbors who I'd sold these pot holders to that they were for the Girl Scouts, but actually the money was for myself. So then one of the neighbors mentioned it to my mom. I think they knew, obviously, because there was no Girl Scout logo on it or anything, but they all did it kind of as to go along. So my mom found out. She drove me around to every single person I sold the pot holder to, made me go tell each one of them that I essentially lied and that the money was for myself. So so anyway, so they all let me keep it. But but I think that was a key part of my entrepreneurial history. And I think, there's lots of slippery slope in this business, and it's very hard to maintain the course. And we've seen it from some of the big names, right? Abraj, there's lots of, I would say,
temptation.
Yeah, and just sometimes it's not even because it's something sinister, it's not negative. It's just what happens, I think, especially in fund management, and when you're managing small funds and you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to do things in a scrappy way, you're trying to put together lots of resources in a really cost-efficient way to make something happen. And sometimes without, kind of what is it, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I mean, it's easy just to neglect certain things and think, oh, I'll take care of that later, or I'll straighten that out later. But actually, it does matter, and I try really hard to bring that sort of professionalism and attention to detail to the business. And what I'm trying to build with Mindshift is something that's a fund management business that with $1 billion opportunity that can grow and scale, because we know that there's demand for funding from female founders everywhere. You know, it's a global problem that we're solving. So, and there's a real need in the market. So even in markets like Sweden, where, you know, they talk about gender equity, only 1% of the funding is going to female founders, and it's not a pipeline issue. There's so many talented founders there, amazing technology, amazing R&D. I'm always blown away when I look at that ecosystem. So I think, you know, so with, in terms of how I, you know, made the transition, I guess, to angel investing, it was really going from the operator. So after microfinance, I, you know, saw this opportunity to start this mobile money business and was raising capital for that, and in the entrepreneur seat, and then had to go pitch to some of these these angel groups. And so I didn't really know much then about angel investing, but as I was pitching to them and learning more about them, I went to the Angel Capital Association summit in the US, which we're now members of as Mindshift. And Marcia Dawood, who's one of our partners, she's actually just this week becoming the chair of the board of the ACA. So, and that was in 2014. So it's interesting how, you know, you feel like you're working really hard to do all these things, and then all of a sudden there is this path, and I can see the upward trajectory, which is nice. So, because you don't always get that kind of gratification in early stage. I mean, it's so long term that it's sometimes hard to feel on a day-by-day basis. But it's nice when I see how all of these different experiences kind of have culminated into Mindshift and what we're building and what we're doing and the kinds of work that we're doing.
What happened to your entrepreneurial venture that you were pitching at the time?
Which one? The mobile money company?
Yeah, mobile
Well,
money.
yeah. So that's also another interesting story. So, and something I think it helps me to relate to founders. So it was a little bit different than the typical sort of tech startup out of the garage. So basically, you know, trying to tell you this quickly, but interest rates in microfinance are very high. So because the cost of administering the loans is high. So basically you've got all of these branches. So in a country like Jordan, you've got maybe 50 branches, and you think, okay, for 5-6 million people, does that really make sense? So basically we wanted to do it all virtually, you know, which there was a model in Kenya, not M-Pesa, but another one called Musoni. I knew the founders pretty well. I knew one of the founding investors, and we wanted to take that model and bring it to the MENA region. So start in Jordan and incubate it, and then basically scale it across the region. Again, this is like 2012. So very early. So, you know, we probably were just too early, I think. But again, it was a bank. So we had to raise a decent amount of capital. It wasn't kind of where you know, the typical startup path, because if you don't capitalize the bank properly in the beginning, it just doesn't stand a chance of surviving. So we were actually raising $10 million as a startup. So we didn't even talk to any individuals or angels. We went straight to the development finance groups out of Europe to get a few of them in to back it. We actually got 5 committed. And then my partner was a Jordanian man who'd been in the microfinance ecosystem for many, many years. You know, he was kind of the practitioner on the ground. And then I was leading the regional scale part. So I was at the holding level. So actually we did have one early angel investor who was putting 500K in. We had 2 actually, and they actually, of the 2, one of them became a director of Wayne as well. So that started that relationship and that history. She's a woman in Dubai. So David, the man in London, he was putting in, you know, $500,000. to kind of get it off the ground. He, had more experience and had been doing this for a while. He went to all the investor meetings with us. I mean, he was really, really active, so that's one of the things I think I learned about angel investing was you're not just investing your money, you're investing your time, your resources. I mean, he connected us with all kinds of other investors. He connected us with his lawyers who provided pro bono legal advice. The woman in Dubai, her background's all marketing and communications, which I'm terrible at. So she would review our pitch decks, give us guidance, train us on the pitch. And I mean, all of that is really, really important as an entrepreneur when you're going through this. So actually, I was climbing Kilimanjaro. We were at 5 million committed. David met me before the climb. And, we were out having a drink one night and he just said, look, I think you'll get to the next 5 million. It's 6 more months of fundraising, but you really need to think about whether you want to be in this partnership. So, because you're doing all the work. So what's your partner doing? So I had then a week on this mountain to think about it, and just came down from the mountain. This is something I'd invested a year of my life in and a decent amount of money, of my own personal money, plus my networks, connections, all of that. And I just called the partner and said, you know what, I don't want to continue. And I think he was disappointed, but I mean, to this day, we're still friends. And I mean, it's a really important learning, and I'm glad. Sometimes I think back on it and, kind of wonder, did I make the right decision? But I think the partnership you're going into is really important, and it is honestly probably harder than a marriage. And I'm married for now 14 years, so I think it's something for founders who are often I get asked, I need a co-founder. Do you know anyone? It's just not like that. You really need to know the person, work with them, have a really strong sense of trust. And sometimes, for example, with Mindshift, I'm a single GP. I have 5 venture partners who were all part of a team, and 2 of them are on the IC with me. So we have a really strong sense of trust. Part of it is our fund is just too small to really, for the economics, to make sense to have more than one GP. I would definitely want to have probably any of them as GPs with me, because we just have that sort of commitment level. But sometimes it's just easier to do it that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, honestly. So it's an important thing. Yeah.
Really difficult once you've invested so. It's more the time than anything else to just let go and say, no, you know what, this isn't working anymore. Let me move on to something. So that's a very difficult decision to make. And clearly it was the right one, but I mean, well done for doing that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I don't know, hindsight's sort of 2020. And now I'm like, God, because that was one of the things I used to get so frustrated by in microfinance was just, there's zero technology in it. And just, the efficiency, and just the high interest rates, and still there's some steps and there's more happening, but it's still very slow. It's just a typical incumbent story where you get these big groups that come in and they stay there and they continue kind of status quo for 20 years. And the same guy is the director for, until he dies, basically. So, it's very different than the tech startup world that I'm in now. And I think for me, the tech startup world is more who I am. I like that constant, change and just adapting and stimulation that you don't always get in the microfinance world. But it does need to be disrupted. I mean, there's so much need for it across the region. And some of the companies actually that we've invested in are trying to change that. So Now Money is a company out of the UAE that does remittances for low-income workers. So they were one of our first investments for Wayne. And I love the founders, they're great. And then also Money Fellows out of Egypt is a company that Dubai Angel Investors invested in. They do the group savings, Gamea in Fimasr, and it's the group loans, but also group savings. And they do it all online, which is amazing. working through the banks. So, but still, it's not, we need more greenfield opportunities to really, I mean, only 10% of the demand is being met. There's so much need for poor people to access financing and access capital across the region.
Definitely. So tell us a bit about Mindshift, how it came about, how you came up with the name, and why you decided to focus. I mean, you said it's kind of an untapped market, women in tech, but what brought that about?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Part of it is my history as a woman in finance, and even in my Cornell classes basically entrepreneurship as well. I was one of the very few, if not only, women. So I got kind of used to it, and then started trying to create change more at the board level once I became more senior in my career. And again, often the only woman on the board, and just all of these things that I feel like I've been trying to do over the last 20 years to create opportunities for women, to get more women into these very male dominant, ecosystems. It's almost the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And then also I've got two sons. They're now 9 and 11. But I started watching. I actually had probably lots of biases as well, unconscious, against women. So even if you are female, it doesn't mean that you don't have these biases, because a lot of it is how you're raised and how you're socialized and what are the gender roles that you're exposed to. And my home where I grew up, my mom was a math teacher. So, she's always been very, very strong at math and numbers and all of that, but still played the typical, I would say, female role in terms of the primary caregiver for the children, cooking, cleaning, all those things that women typically end up doing in the household. So I just started to realize more and more that as I was watching my sons in school and going to these award ceremonies, and the girls were actually the primary winners of these awards in math and science. And I thought, okay, this is crazy. Like, why are there not more of us than at these levels? And then I've got my best friend. She was a managing director at JP Morgan Chase. And just kind of watching some of these role models, and just not enough of them. And it's so toxic at the top. As a female, it's just not worth it. It's like you get stomach aches, ulcers. I mean, all of these things, you've got to be 100% more knowledgeable, more experienced. And it's just painful, and it's too much. So I was sitting one day actually at one of these ACA summits in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And, I was at a table with all men. I was the only woman. So, and then Mitch and Frida Kapoor were on stage talking about unconscious bias. So they're the founders of the Kapoor Fund. Mitch Kapoor was the founder of Lotus Notes, which he then sold to IBM for a big exit. And they set up the funds, and they invest in underrepresented founders. That's been their fund's thesis for many years. So I was listening to them talking about unconscious bias, about things like women get asked different questions at pitch competitions. There's always kind of a negative beginning, tell us about why you're losing so much money. Whereas the guys will get asked, tell us about the future potential of your business. So there's all of these different screens that get applied. So I started thinking about all of that, and just thinking, God, we just need a mind shift, and how we think about women in tech and investing in women. And not just the men, all of us, need this mind shift. So that was really I had a long plane ride back to Dubai, 17 hours to just think about this. And I'd actually never wanted to have a fund, because I know how much work they are. And especially in the beginning, as you're putting them together, and all the admin and back office. And that's actually the part I probably enjoy more, is the angel investing. But I also thought, to really create change, we need to do things differently, and we just need new models. So we need to innovate this space. And the only way to do that is just, instead of trying to fit into the pre-existing models, is to create our own. So Mindshift is really, it's women-led. We have one guy who's a venture partner, but the rest are all women. And that's because we're investing in sectors where we see more female founders. So we invest in health and wellness tech, food tech, ed tech, and fintech. And in general, I would say just over the course of my years of investing, I see many more female founders in those sectors. And then the kinds of businesses that I think women build tend to be, just built differently. Women really take a very long-term view. So I saw that all the time in microfinance, where it was the women were the borrowers who would be targeted because they were actually the most creditworthy. They would pay back 98, 99% of the time. When Muhammad Yunus started this in 1970s in Bangladesh, that's why he started lending to women, not to men. Men paid back 60% of the time. And part of it is women invest in their families and their communities and their homes. They would think about their children's education in 15 years. So, and they would save for that moment. They're very focused on saving. Men are more focused on spending. Then I see that all the time in the kinds of companies that we invest in. I mean, the female founders are more capital efficient. They spend far less. Their budgets are lower. Their valuations are lower as well. They're more attractive, I think, as investors. And they're thinking long term. They really, once they commit, they stay with it until either it's really obviously a failure or it's an exit. So to maybe sometimes to a flaw, but I think that's something that if I had to generalize, those would be the characterizations I see a lot. So yeah, and I think we just need more models like Mindshift. We need new funds. We need new people in the business. One of the data points I talk about a lot that gets referenced is if a female founder goes to a VC fund where there's at least one female partner, she's 3 times as likely to get funded. The problem is there are very few female partners. So you might find women at the junior level, kind of associate analysts, but at the partner level, there are very, very few of us. So, I mean, some people refer to us as an endangered species. So that's how few there are. And then founding partners, there are only 2% are founding partners, the women. So, and this is all US data. I think globally it's much, much worse. Only 10% of the VC partners in the US are female. So, and there's it just creates networks of networks of networks. So this is a networks business. And I think what we wanted to do is create a pool of intentional capital that invests with a gender lens, we call it. So we only invest in companies where there's at least one female founder or co-founder who's operational in the business. We've invested in companies. With Mindshift, we've got 9 companies that we've invested in our portfolio. Some of them are mixed teams, like we're investors in Munchon with Mohammed Zabin and Dana Baki. We're investors in Little Thinking Minds, where it's all female founders, Lamia Taba Bibi and Rama Kayali. So the key thing is we do see a change when there's at least one woman who's also operational, not just somebody who's kind of on the board or a passive investor, but somebody who's really active in the business.
I work also here in Oman in the kind of VC space, and I hardly ever come across, definitely no partners or women in management in the investment space, and very, very few founders. So it's very true. And in the region, like you said, it's very, very little. So it's amazing that you're doing this and that you're doing it here as well. I mean, investing globally, but in the region as well.
But actually, I think it's one of the secrets of the region that doesn't get out, and I wish it would get out more. But there's so many female founders. I mean, I actually think 50% of the founders are women, just from the pipeline that we see in the deal flow. The problem is a lot of them, this was the other reason to set up Mindshift, because Wayne is great, and I'm really grateful. We've got 50 women angel investors. Part of my mission in setting up Wayne was really about getting more women involved in investing, because again, if you change one side of the table, you change the other side. So getting more women involved as angel investors, because we, especially culturally, I think it's quite sensitive in the region sometimes. We just relate more to the kinds of products that are being built. So Wayne made 10 investments. I mean, the other big reason is that female founders can generally pull together a seed round at the angel level, through their kind of friends and family network. Getting the institutional round in is really challenging. And that's what I saw over and over again in my portfolio, is that there would be companies that essentially just, hit the valley of death, we call it, where they just couldn't get the Series A in because part of it was they hadn't hit the milestones needed. But so what would happen is they'd have to raise a bridge round. The bridge round was really challenging for a lot of them because usually what happens is they're underfunded at seed round. So in lots of ways, it's very similar to what I saw in microfinance, I was describing. If you don't capitalize the bank properly in the beginning, it just fails. So I think, what we wanted to change was to in the institutional space, our target is really that bridge round. So we don't want to be first money in at seed. We want to be we also don't want to be in too late. We want to be in probably kind of the bridge between seed and A or pre-A, all these different terms that float around. But that's kind of what our sweet spot is, because there's some traction. We can see what the market looks like. There's, a little bit of history as a team. And then the valuation is usually strong as well. So,
what would you say is a career highlight from microfinance to angel investment and now more would you say is one of the major highlights?
Grameen Jamil was probably my dream job. It was actually what I wrote about in my business school application. So I think all of it is amazing. Mindshift has been another dream. So we haven't done our final close yet. We're doing actually a second closing in 2 days. So we're getting some more capital in, which is great, but it has been a slog, so it's not easy to raise capital even and by the way, something I didn't talk about yet, but it's really important, is that women make more money. So that's the other thing there's so many data points now around these companies just being better, kind of better returns. First Round Capital talks about how over their last 10 years of investments, women-led teams have outperformed by 63%. We actually, with Mindshift, we just did our first fund audit, and we're at 47% IRR. So, that's way, way better than most of the funds in the region. So, yeah, again, I think with a 1.5x increase in value, and that's literally in 1 year, so that's pretty phenomenal. So I think,
There's some female entrepreneurs in the audience, so I just want to tell them that they should type their questions because we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon, so be sure to type your questions. I wanted to ask you about any stories of kind of failure or lowlights, I guess, and how you learned from that. Other than, of course, that's not a failure at all, but deciding to kind of cut the ties with your partner for the mobile money. But what would you say was a kind of low that really helped you learn in your career?
That was probably the lowest, the one that I told you. So, I think, there've been other, I'm a big believer in learning from mistakes. Okay, so here's another easy example. In my early days of angel investing, there was another investor I know who's a friend. She's, I'd say, more of acquaintance than a friend, but she was investing in a protein powder company, plant-based. So, I've been vegetarian pretty much all my life, and that's the other mind shift that we see. There's a big these shifts that are occurring in consumer behaviors are just driving all these different business models, especially in things like food. Lots of focus on healthy eating, longevity. That's driving an uptake in like veganism, plant-based, all of these other areas. So this was probably, I don't know, a while ago, but so she sent me this company she was investing in, and I said, looks awesome. We did some diligence. I actually, I never tasted the product. So there are 3 types of plant-based protein powder it's an American company that this company makes. And, I didn't really know so much about the food business at that time. So invested in it, and then in a convertible note. And then I actually got a chance to try the product, and I was like, I do not like any of this. Like, this is horrible, like it's so gritty. I don't like it. And then you could tell because sort of successively with this founder that he just wasn't going to be able to scale the business. And so we actually a few of us ended up calling the loan and getting our money out. But I think my lesson from that was don't invest in companies where you haven't tried the product. So if somebody sends you something, make sure that, that's doing all the legal and financial due diligence and people due diligence is one thing, but like actually, one of my mentors in business school was one of the founders of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and she would always say it starts and ends with product. And I really think that's true. So that was a mistake I made that I've hopefully learned from since.
But you got all your money back, no harm done.
Yeah, and I got interest as well on it. Yeah, so yeah, it was fine. It didn't hurt. We structured it so that, I never want to hurt the founder, and I don't normally do. I've never done that before, where we've called the loan. It's pretty atypical in venture, but we structured it. Basically, gave him a new loan at a little bit higher 6% interest rate, but in a way that he could actually pay it off. So yeah, he came through. I see there's a question, Sarah. Do you want me to answer that?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. What do you look for in a startup to invest in?
Yeah, thanks, Amal, for the question. I mean, I would say the most important things for us are really the people and then the scalability. So those are we look for probably 5 factors, but the 2 most important is really who are the people behind this, because we know that we know that the business is going to change over time, and there, often there's pivots and things that come up that you can't predict and things out of your control, but we're always going to back that team. So the people is critical. And then the other part is just how big can this get? So, and to be honest, this is a challenge often in markets like Muscat in Dubai, where the size of the market is small. So to be able to scale and to grow, and that's what we look for in tech. We're looking for sort of the hockey stick growth. And if the market's too small because, let's say you're only targeting vegetarian dog food, which actually is a thing now, but if you're selling it, let's say only in Dubai, then it's probably not going to be something that's going to scale. So because that's where we make our money. We go in early, and then over kind of 5-7 years, hopefully we go out once the later stage investors come in or there's a full exit.
Great. Any last? There's another one. What advice would you give an entrepreneur wanting to scale their business?
I think, especially if you're in Oman, thinking about how do you go into other markets. So the market we all talk about in the region is Saudi because of the size. Egypt is another attractive market, again, because of its size. Pakistan is another massive market that isn't so far away. So thinking about how to get into bigger markets and scale your business is really critical. US, it just depends on what your networks are, what the product is. You don't want to go into a market where it's very competitive. So trying to find that right fit between, being able to enter the market easily, and then, and I think also when you're scaling, you've got to think about, and this I also learned the hard way from another investment. It was actually a water bag business that was global, and they couldn't figure out the logistics and the supply networks well. So for example, they actually had purchase orders in Kenya and in Uganda, but they couldn't get the import stuff right. So it just took a long time. The manufacturing was being done in China, so trying to get the product from China into Kenya and Uganda was really challenging for them. So I would say trying to think as simply as possible and to do it in a way that is easy is the best advice I could offer.
So how could, if there were any female entrepreneurs that got in touch after this, how can they get in touch with you, and how can they pitch to Mindshift?
Yeah, so we use Gust, Gust, as our application platform. So if you go on there and look for Mindshift, you can submit an application for funding, and we do try to respond. I think you'll get some kind of feedback. We are fairly picky. I mean, I just get inundated, as I'm sure you can imagine, with messages on LinkedIn and emails and basically what people always ask us about our due diligence process, and what we're looking for is what's the fastest way to get to know, because we don't want to waste the founder's time, and we also don't want to waste our own time. So we have like what we call pre-DD, and then we have DD. Once we actually go into DD, we've already talked to our investment committee. We're 90% sure we're probably going to invest in the company. Pre-DD is a set of 10 questions that you'll find on our application form on Gust, where things like, is there something that's wrong with the company and a reason not to invest? Like, the founder sold off 40% of the business in the angel round, and so now the capital structure is flawed. Those kinds of things. So, or it doesn't meet our gender lens criteria. So we wouldn't. I mean, surprisingly, that happens a lot. I would say if you're a founder, another piece of advice I would offer is just do a little bit of homework on investors before you approach them. I'm always surprised that someone hasn't even gone to our website to see like what sectors we invest in, or what are the gender lens. So I often get teams of all guys who contact us asking us for funding, and I just think it doesn't reflect well on them when they do that. Because if I'm going to spend my time looking at the business and looking at a deck, then they should spend their time looking at our website and trying to understand whether there's a fit between our fund and their business.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. I'm sure it was very useful for everyone. We will be putting it up on the Startup Grind YouTube. So go ahead and follow everyone. The YouTube of Startup Grind is the global one. It's not just someone specific. So then it's a wider reach. And that's about it. Thank you very much, Heather.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it was great. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.